During my mother's funeral, an air of sorrow was unexpectedly pierced by my mother-in-law's unanticipated presence. With a less than appropriate smirk, she hinted at her future residence in my family home, suggesting she might even choose a room then and there. "This house should belong to my son," she declared, proposing that it was only fitting for the property to pass to her son following his wife's passing. This was her logic, despite the house being legally mine, as she boldly shared plans to move in, asserting the house was too splendid to stand vacant. I stood amidst cherished memories of my parents, heartbroken and conflicted. My home, crafted lovingly by my father and adored by my mother, was now the center of a tactless claim by my mother-in-law who seemed indifferent to my grief. While mourning, I reflected on my life's unexpected turns. I was a 40-year-old office worker who had almost given up on marriage until I met Kevin, my husband, who is 3 years my junior. We connected through a friend and soon married, his caring nature and respect for my opinions forming the foundation of our relationship. He always valued my wishes, even when it meant tough conversations, like when he agreed that our parents wouldn't live with us despite his initial suggestion that his mother join us due to his father's failing health. Kevin always made sure my voice was heard, which occasionally left me feeling undeservingly privileged. Our marriage brought joy, yet it was shadowed by sadness from past losses. My father, a stern but respected small business owner, passed away 4 years before my wedding, and I often regretted that he couldn't see me married. 3 years after our wedding, I also lost my mother, adding to the emotional weight I carried. As these thoughts mingled with current events, my resolve hardened. I was determined to protect my heritage and the sanctity of my parents' home from being overshadowed by unwelcome plans. Kevin's support was crucial, but the path forward was marked by my own steadfast decision to honor and preserve the legacy of the home that had meant so much to my family. Throughout my mother's funeral, my husband was a pillar of strength, always by my side, offering the kind of support that made me feel profoundly grateful to have him in my life. Then, amid the solemnity, my mother-in-law Abigail made her appearance. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she offered softly, to which I thanked her, feeling a touch of relief. Before this, Abigail and I had maintained a polite distance, but the funeral seemed to bring out another aspect of her personality. As the service concluded, Abigail approached me with a surprising cheerfulness. "Thanks for your help during the funeral. It went smoothly because of you," she complimented, which initially seemed thoughtful given the circumstances. However, her demeanor soon shifted in a way that hinted at other intentions. "Your parents had such a lovely home," she commented as she ventured further into the house, ignoring my mention of its current disarray. "Mom, this isn't a good time. Some areas are a bit messy," I protested, but undeterred, she continued, "Don't worry about the details. What matters is that this house will go to my son. Maybe I should pick a room now." I hesitated, taken aback by her audacity. "Actually, I'm the one inheriting this house," I corrected her, but she only smirked in response. "Your parents didn't have any other kids, right? And doesn't a wife's stuff belong to her husband? So technically this house is my son's, isn't it?" Her words left me sighing in frustration. "Is that really how it works?" I questioned, more to myself than to her. "Let's just get along from now on," she chirped, misunderstanding my tone. I paused, unsure of her meaning. "What do you mean by get along?" She confidently replied, "I mean, I'll take this room. You and Kevin will move in later, won't you?" "So we'll be living together?" I asked, seeking clarity. "Exactly, it's settled. Such a grand house shouldn't have empty rooms when 2 people can live there. Finally, I won't have to take care of my husband alone," she declared as if it were a done deal. But I was still mourning. My mother had just passed away, and here was my mother-in-law discussing living arrangements as if it were a casual matter. Her timing couldn't have been worse, and my patience was wearing thin. "Why would you joke at a time like this?" I wondered aloud, my tone rising with anger. My husband, overhearing our conversation, intervened. "Mom, what are you saying? This isn't the time for this." Abigail brushed him off. "Why are you making such a fuss?" But my husband stood his ground. "Please leave," he insisted firmly, supporting me in a moment when I needed it most, reminding me again why I felt so lucky to have him. He gently guided her out of the house. "Sorry, she can be difficult," he apologized. "It's okay, thank you for handling it," I replied, feeling grateful for my husband's steadfast support. However, as time passed, I began to sense that his motives for rebuking my mother-in-law might not entirely align with mine. 8 days after my mother's funeral, with the immediate chaos subdued, we revisited the conversation about my family home. My husband brought up a suggestion that caught me off guard. "This apartment feels cramped. Shouldn't we consider moving to my parents' house?" he proposed. "You're right. With more belongings and maybe kids down the line, it would be better than this tiny space," I agreed. "So we should start getting ready," he said, then hesitated before adding, "But there's something I want to discuss about the move." "What is it?" I asked, sensing hesitation. He took a moment, then said, "Considering the big house and empty rooms, I thought maybe my parents could move in with us." "Wait, you mean to live together?" I was taken aback. While my husband is usually kind, I've started to notice something unsettling. While I once thought he always valued my opinion, it now seemed he might just be going along with things. Could he be too easily influenced? His suggestion to live with my mother-in-law, despite my clear objections, was concerning. He keeps bringing it up, putting my mother-in-law's wishes above mine. "I've said it before, we're not living together," I reminded him firmly. "But Mom won't let it go," he replied. "You stood up to her during the funeral. You defended me and said no to living together," I countered. "Well, yes, I was upset about her intrusion, but that doesn't mean I'm totally against it. I just didn't think it was the right time to decide," he explained. It became clear that while he nodded along and repeated my words, he seemed more inclined to agree with my mother-in-law. Despite advocating for open discussions, he maintained a distance and avoided making firm decisions. Perhaps he thought he was being neutral, but people like him can be complicated. They convince themselves they're impartial and capable of making the right calls. It's frustrating. Anyway, I refused to live with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and suggested taking over a room. "I've said it before and I won't budge. Tell your mom that," I told him firmly. "Why does it bother you?" he asked. "Fine, I'll tell her myself," I responded, already mentally bracing for the possibility of living with my in-laws, yet determined to set clear boundaries. When we tied the knot, the unsettling behavior my mother-in-law exhibited at my mother's funeral made one thing crystal clear. Living together in the family home my father built and where my mother lived her whole life was a non-starter. Now, witnessing my husband's indecisiveness only reinforced that cohabiting was beyond consideration. As I voiced my opposition, my mother-in-law confronted me directly, questioning my stance given our home's ample space. She pressed on, arguing that since I was Kevin's wife, his parents were now my responsibility too. I had already refused the idea of living together, explaining, "I'm sorry, but managing your son's mobility issues is already a lot for me. I can't take on more." "So you're abandoning us?" she countered, not truly listening to the reasons I had laid out. "I'm sorry, but after your dismissive response, I won't ask anything more of you," she retorted sharply. I empathized with my father-in-law's health situation, but knowing my mother-in-law's past behavior, I dreaded that all caregiving duties would inevitably fall to me if we all lived under one roof. If that were ever to be considered, it would require a drastic change in attitude from both my husband and my mother-in-law. Just a few days after her sharp accusations, I noticed my husband rearranging the living room, moving furniture around, and making space. "What's going on? Are we storing boxes here?" I asked, puzzled. "No, I'm making room for 2 beds," he replied. The mere mention of 2 beds made my heart sink. "Are your parents coming to stay?" I asked cautiously. "No, they're moving in starting today," he admitted, revealing the unpleasant truth despite my clear objections. Why? I pressed, confused and upset. Their lease is up, so we agreed they'd move here instead of renewing. It'll be crowded with 4 of us, but we're moving soon, right? Just bear with it for a bit, he explained as if it were a minor inconvenience, but that wasn't what I wanted at all. Why is cohabitation even an option? I've said before I don't want to live with someone who barged into my parents' house on the day of the funeral and suggested taking over a room. I reminded him firmly. I'll talk to Mom. From now on, we'll be living together, so please try to get along, he insisted. Why do you always side with your mom? I questioned, feeling sidelined. He tried to smooth things over. It's not about favoring her, let's just try to make it work. But his words felt hollow, leaving me to grapple with the reality of a quickly shrinking personal space and a rapidly expanding family dynamic. While I've always seen my husband as a kind and caring partner, his dynamics shift noticeably when paired with his mother, making for a challenging living situation. Now, against my wishes, we're being nudged into cohabitation with my in-laws. This apartment is already cramped for the 4 of us, but we'll manage until we can move, I remark, with a mix of resignation and frustration. My mother-in-law, freshly moved in, has already started voicing complaints about the room, adding to the tension. I apologize for the sudden addition, I offer, trying to keep the peace. We'll try not to be a burden. If your mobility issues cause any problems, please let us know. My father-in-law, Raymond, who has some difficulty moving around, is handling things better than I expected. He experiences minor discomfort but manages quite well, which makes me wonder whether my mother-in-law was genuinely struggling to care for him before they moved in. He's polite and insists on doing things himself, unlike my mother-in-law who tends to be more demanding. One day he approached me looking slightly worried. Is there a pharmacy nearby? I forgot my medic patch and need to buy one, he asks. Wait, dear. With your mobility issues, it's best to stay here. If you fall outside, it could inconvenience Kevin and the others, right? Why not ask them to buy the patch for you? I suggest, trying to minimize risks. But I usually buy it myself, he counters, clearly uncomfortable with depending too much on others. Well, you have a point. Sorry, but I need it urgently. Can you go get it for me? He asks politely. Of course, I agree. Fetching a medicated patch might seem like a trivial task, but it underscores a larger issue. My mother-in-law often makes decisions without involving me, and although my father-in-law is polite, he tends to follow her lead, much like my husband becoming another yes man in her presence. It's just a small errand this time, but as we continue living together, I fear that more responsibilities will inevitably fall onto me. Can I let these people move into my parents' cherished home, potentially altering its atmosphere and legacy? It's not something I take lightly. If they move in permanently, they could change the essence of the house I hold dear. As my mother-in-law and father-in-law settle into our current space and eye my parents' home for their next move, I find myself needing to take preemptive action to protect my parents' legacy. One morning, my mother-in-law, clearly in good spirits about the prospect of moving into the spacious house, casually asks, "Hey, can we borrow the key to your parents' house?" Her request cements my resolve. I need to safeguard my family home, not just the physical structure, but the memories and values it represents. My mother-in-law, always brimming with plans and projects, came up to me with a request. We want to check out our rooms. I have some errands, so I'll give the key to Kevin. She then turned to my husband. Kevin, can you drop us off before heading home? We need to visit the storage room where we left our stuff. We need to measure the furniture sizes, she added. Sure thing, I'll take the key, I replied, trying to maintain a neutral tone despite her cheerful demeanor. For about 8 days, everything seemed peaceful, with no overt conflicts between us. Yet, unbeknownst to them, I was meticulously preparing my next steps. Okay, everything's set for the move. Life in that house will start soon, I announced once my husband and in-laws finished their preparations. But I had a different announcement to make. I have something to discuss, I said. What is it? Spit it out, my husband urged, his curiosity piqued. Is it about our move celebration plans? My mother-in-law wondered, clearly expecting something trivial. No, we're not moving there, I clarified, their expressions shifting from curious to confused. What do you mean? She exclaimed. I handed over a document. This is my application to renounce my inheritance, I stated firmly. Renounce your inheritance? That's a joke, right? My husband protested. It's no joke. Look, it's officially approved by the court, I insisted. That house means a lot to me. I couldn't bear to see you living there, so I've decided to let it go, keeping it as a cherished memory in my heart, I explained. What madness possessed you? You could have sold it for money. Even if you were giving it up, why abandon it? My mother-in-law scolded. Even if I sold it, you'd just rely on the money. I thought it'd be clearer if I had nothing, I reasoned. We moved out of our old place for this move, you know. What's going on? How will you make it up to us? She retorted, her tone sharp. I've always opposed living together. You forced it on me without proper discussion, so I had to take a stand. I stood firm. Upon hearing that I renounced my inheritance, both my husband and mother-in-law were stunned. Their faces drained, they were speechless, their energy depleted. My father-in-law looked puzzled as he watched them, but I was not backing down. Kevin, I pressed on, I've been considering divorce. What do you think? Divorce? My husband stumbled over the word, clearly taken aback. Kevin, you should divorce this absurd wife immediately, my mother-in-law chimed in, seizing the opportunity. Her immediate call for divorce was shocking but expected. What I wanted to know was whether my husband could make his own decision at this crucial moment. Would he stand by me, or would he continue to be swayed by his mother's influence? This was the test of our marriage and his resolve. If my husband sided with his mother at this critical juncture, our future would undoubtedly face even tougher challenges. The mention of divorce had stirred a whirlwind of emotions, and while I awaited his response, my resolve to proceed with the divorce had only hardened. Fine, divorce is the only option, my mother-in-law declared abruptly, cutting through the tense air. Kevin, it's unavoidable. Your mom is adamant, my father-in-law interjected, trying to mediate but subtly nudging my husband toward agreement. It seems you also want a divorce, and maybe that's for the best, my husband finally spoke, his voice a mixture of resignation and an attempt to align with what he presumed were my wishes. His tendency to remain a yes man to his mother was evident, even in this pivotal decision. Very well, I declared with a firm nod. Let's proceed with the divorce. I'll move out with just the essentials. I spent the subsequent night at a budget hotel, reflecting on the tumultuous events. The next day, with pressing matters at hand, I took a half-day off work and returned to the courthouse to further my plans. A few days later, my mother-in-law reached out, her tone accusatory. "What's this about the house becoming yours?" she demanded. "Why the sudden concern? Did you learn about it during the estate division process?" I countered, curious about her sudden interest. "Yes, that house is rightfully mine. You forged documents and deceived us," she accused vehemently. "Why would I forge court documents? Those are genuine," I responded calmly. "Then why is the house going to you when you were supposed to renounce the inheritance?" She pressed for answers. After that, I withdrew the renunciation application. Renouncing an inheritance is complex. Once filed, it takes about a month to be accepted, during which it can be withdrawn. The documents I showed were from the application stage, not acceptance. I made you believe I had given up the house and mentioned divorce to gauge your reactions and plan my next steps. I had hoped Kevin would oppose the divorce, but your mindset didn't change, I explained, unveiling my strategic move. So the house becomes yours since it was acquired before the divorce. It's subject to property division, right? She inquired, trying to grasp the situation. In such cases, you two would split the proceeds from selling it, she asserted, trying to claim a share. But I have prepared for this. If it were jointly acquired, it'd be shared property, but it's inherited, so it's exempt from division. Unfortunately, specific assets like this aren't eligible for division, I reiterated, having already consulted legal advice. Did you consult a lawyer when you found out the house would be mine? She asked, probing further if Kevin had contributed financially to the house, in ways that might affect its status. If Kevin had paid off the house loan or covered renovation costs, those expenses might have been considered, she added, grasping at straws to find a loophole. However, well prepared and informed, I stood firm on the legal grounds that protected my inheritance, ready to defend my rights and the home that held so many cherished memories. "But I assumed that didn't happen," I replied, addressing her probing about the potential financial gain Kevin could receive from the property division. "We've only been married a short time, so there's not much to divide, maybe just the car, though it still has a loan on it," I explained, trying to clarify the minimal impact of our brief marriage on the property division. "You're selfishly claiming the inheritance, aren't you?" "Heartless," she accused sharply. "I'm protecting my parents' memories. I don't want people like you in their home. If you have further complaints, consult a lawyer," I responded firmly, ending the conversation on a definitive note. After the call, the divorce proceedings moved forward smoothly. Presumably, she urged my husband to push for a swift divorce. Regardless of her motivations, the divorce was finalized and I was free from having to deal with my in-laws. I felt a deep sense of relief, as if I had safeguarded my father's home, preserving the sanctuary of my childhood memories. Following the divorce, my former in-laws continued to live in the apartment that my ex-husband and I had shared. Even with one less person, the space must have felt cramped. They looked into other housing options but faced challenges due to their age. Eventually, my ex-husband rented a smaller single-family home for them. Though it was smaller than our previous apartment, it was still a house, and the rent was likely higher. He would need to support them moving forward, which I anticipated would be challenging for him. My former mother-in-law, who had been so eager about the large house my father left behind, was now settling for a much smaller home. I imagined her disappointment, having been fixated on a grander living arrangement that never materialized. As for me, I started a new chapter of my life back in my parents' house. It felt comforting, almost as if my parents were still with me. Their presence felt in every room and cherished memory housed within those walls. If you found this story compelling, consider following along for more updates. Until next time, take care.